نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, we'll continue with reading from the book known as al-Awsat fi السنن والإجماع والاختلاف لأبي بكر Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn al-Mundhir rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 318. And we're still in this section where the author is mentioning the things that there is disagreement regarding the obligation of purification because of them. Things where the scholars have differed. Is that action something that necessitates a purification, whether it be wudu or a ghusl or what takes the place of them from tayammum, etc. So we have reached the chapter after the author mentioned the difference about the things that one expels from their body and the disagreement of those types of actions, the things that one expels from their body. He is now mentioning some other things that are not from that which deals with things that the body excretes or expels. And so he says, ذكر الأشياء التي اختلف في وجوب الطهارة منها ذكر الوضوء من مس الذكر. This section is regarding the mentioning of those things that there is disagreement about the obligation of purification because of them. And from that, there is what has been mentioned regarding wudu because of touching the penis. So from the things that are well known amongst the people of fiqh and those who study it, is that there is a disagreement amongst the scholars that's touching one's private part in general, whether it be the front or the back, male or female, but even more specifically, the private part, that is the penis. Does it nullify one's purification and thus require a purification from the individual, that purification being wudu? And so this chapter has some length to it. So we will probably not conclude it all in one sitting. And the author himself, he actually goes into some extra detail, and then he follows it up with supplementary chapters that go into the things outside of the penis. And so this is going to be a long section, the section that has to deal with touching the penis and that which is similar or close proximity to the penis. And so we'll start with what the author says about this first section, that which has been mentioned about making wudu because of touching the penis. The word penis in Arabic is dhakar. A dhakar because it's the organ of the male, right? And so the male is called the male because of this organ, the dhakar. And so the author, he says, اختلف أهل العلم في وجوب الطهارة من مس الذكر فقالت طائفة إذا مس ذكره توضأ. روي هذا القول عن عمر بن الخطاب وسعد بن أبي وقاص وأبي هريرة وابن عباس وكان ابن عمر يتوضأ من مس الذكر. Ibn al-Mundhir, he says that the people of knowledge, they differ regarding the obligation of purification because of touching the dhakar. And mess is to rub, right? To caress, to touch like this, right? Mess, meme, seen. And it's similar to mess. Mess is more of a wiping, while mess is just to touch, right? He says, so the people of knowledge, they disagree regarding the obligation of purification because of touching the penis. And this topic, like we're going to talk about it in all of its facets from that which the author mentions, but it has to deal with touching your own penis, somebody else touching your penis, you touching somebody else's penis. These type of things, there's a disagreement. Does it nullify the wudu? And the wudu of who does it nullify? Obviously, if it touches yours, it's disagreement if you touch yours. But what about if somebody touches yours? Does it nullify your purification or their purification or both? Or what about if you're a woman, for example, and when it comes to your husband or your son, if you're changing him or something like that, or if you're in a medical profession and you happen to touch somebody else's penis, does it nullify their wudu or yours or both or none? So these are the topics that we're going to talk about in this section. So he says the people of knowledge, they disagree regarding the obligation of purification because of touching the penis. So a group of them say that if a person touches his penis, if a person touches his penis, he must make wudu. And this statement was reported on Umar ibn al-Khattab, as well as Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas and Abi Hurairah, as well as Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu would make wudu from touching the penis. So all of these Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, Umar and Sa'd and Abi Hurairah, Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar, they used to say or do, i.e. wudu, because of touching the penis. After mentioning those who held that statement from the Salaf, al-Awa'il, he then mentions his chain to support all of those claims. And so he says, حدثنا محمد بن إسماعيل الصائغ قال حدثنا إبراهيم بن المنذر قال حدثني بن وهب قال حدثني عمرو بن الحارث عن جعفر بن ربيعة عن عمارة بن عبد الله بن طعمة عن سعيد بن المسيب قال أنه قال عمر من مس فرجه فليتوضأ. He says that Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Sa'igh, right? Not al-Bukhari, al-Sa'igh, another one. He said that Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Sa'igh narrated to us. He said that Ibrahim ibn al-Mundhir narrated to us. He said that Ibn Wahb narrated to me. He said that Amr ibn al-Harith narrated to me on the authority of Ja'far ibn Rabi'ah, on the authority of Umara ibn Abdullah ibn Tu'mah, on the authority of Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab, who said that Umar, yani ibn al-Khattab, he said, whoever touches their private part. And when we say private part in English, we know what we're referring to. We're referring to those sexual organs from the penis, the vagina, and the anus, right? Whoever touches their farj, then they must make wudu. This was the statement of Umar. Whoever touches their farj. And so he used the general word, whoever touches their private part, whoever touches their penis, whoever touches their anus, whoever touches their vagina, then they must make wudu. This is the statement of Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. The next narration, he says, حدثنا علي بن عبد العزيز قال حدثنا الكعنبي عن مالك عن ابن شهاب عن سالم بن عبد الله أنه قال أن عبد الله بن عمر كان يغتسل ثم يتوضأ فقلت له يا أبتي أما يجزئك الغسل من الوضوء؟ قال بلى ولكن أحيانا أمس ذكري فأتوضأ. He says that Ali ibn Abdul Aziz narrated to us. He said that Al-Ka'nabi narrated to us on the authority of Malik, on the authority of Ibn Shihab, on the authority of Salim ibn Abdullah. So this is one of those best chains you can get, right? Zuhri and Salim and Abihi, right? He said that Abdullah ibn Umar, he used to bathe, and then he would make wudu after bathing, he says. And so I said to him, yani Salim, he said to his father, I said to him, oh, my beloved father, isn't it sufficient for you, the ghusl, or doesn't the ghusl suffice you from having to make a wudu? Doesn't the ghusl suffice you from having to make a wudu? He said, of course, but sometimes I touch my penis, and so I make wudu. So this was Ibn Umar taking a ghusl, but if he were to touch his penis while making a ghusl, when he was done, he would make wudu, because he would consider touching his penis while making a ghusl something that nullified his minor purification. So he would finish making his wudu, his ghusl, and then he would make wudu afterwards. نعم, he says, حدثنا علي قال أخبرنا الكعنبي عن مالك النافع أن ابن عمر كان يقول إذا مس الرجل فرجه فقد وجب عليه الوضوء. This is another one of those extremely authentic narrations, right? Silsilatul Dhahab, where Ibn al-Mundhir, he says that Ali narrated to us. He said that Al-Ka'nabi informed us on the authority of Malik, on the authority of Nafi', that Ibn Umar, yani Nafi' and Malik and Nafi' and Ibn Umar, that Ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he used to say, if a man touches his privates, right, his private parts, his farj, then the wudu has become obligatory upon him. And like we said, does this word farj refer to the front and the back, or just the front, right? And is this statement exclusively for a male, or does it include the female? We'll get into some of that disagreement. But this statement that we've just read is that if a man touches his private area, his farj, his sexual organ, then it has become obligatory upon him to make wudu. Wudu is obligatory upon him. This was the statement of Ibn Umar. He says, حدثنا الكعنبي أو حدثنا علي قال حدثنا الكعنبي عن مالك عن إسماعيل بن محمد بن سعد بن أبي وقاص عن مصعب بن سعد أنه قال كنت أمسك المصحف على أبي سعد فاحتككت فقال لعلك مسست ذكرك قلت نعم قال فقم فتوضأ فقمت فتوضأت ثم رجعت. Ibn al-Mundhir, he says that Ali narrated to us. He said that al-Ka'nabi narrated to us on the authority of Malik, on the authority of Ismail ibn Muhammad ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Waqas, on the authority of Mus'ab ibn Sa'd, i.e. his uncle. He said that I used to hold the Mus'haf for Abi Sa'd, right? Abi Sa'd, yani Abi Sa'd, not Abi Sa'd, yani my father Sa'd. He says, I used to hold the Mus'haf for my father Sa'd, yani Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. And once I scratched, right? Once upon a time, or one time I had to scratch myself. And so he said, maybe you touched your penis. When you were scratching, maybe you touched your penis. I said, yes. And so he said, stand up and go make wudu, right? A command, stand up and go make wudu. Mus'ab, he said, so I stood up and I made wudu and then I returned. Right, so this shows us that Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas had this view that you should make wudu, because he had the view that you shouldn't touch the mushaf without wudu. And when this individual scratched their penis, he commanded him to make wudu. Ibn al-Mundhir, he says, حدثنا يحيى بن محمد قال حدثنا مسدد قال حدثنا أمية بن خالد قال حدثنا عمر بن أبي وهب الخزاعي عن جميل عن أبي وهب عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه قال من مس ذكره فليتوضأ ومن مس فوق الثوب فلا يتوضأ. He says that Yahya ibn Muhammad narrated to us. He said that Musaddad narrated to us. He said that Umayyah ibn Khalid narrated to us. He said that Umar ibn Abi Wahb al-Khuza'i narrated to us on the authority of Jamil, on the authority of Abi Wahb, on the authority of Abi Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who said, whoever touches their penis, then he must make wudu. And whoever touches it from above their clothing or the clothing, then there is no wudu necessary. Whoever touches their penis, then they must make wudu. And whoever touches it from above their clothing, then there is no wudu necessary. This is the statement of Abu Hurairah. He says, حدثنا محمد بن علي قال حدثنا سعيد قال حدثنا عتاب ibn Bishr, or Attab ibn Bishr, or it could be Itab, but I think it's Attab ibn Bishr. Let's double check. Attab ibn Bishr. Attab ibn Bishr. Nobody speaks about him directly. I apologize. Like I say, it's for me. Attab ibn Bishr. Nobody speaks about him directly, but let me see if I can find anybody else who has a similar name or their values. Yeah, Attab. Somebody who criticizes often. Attab. Right? Attab ibn Bishr. قال أخبرنا خصيف عن عكرمة عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما في مس الذكر قال إن عركته عرك الأديم فتوضأ وإلا فلا. He says that Muhammad ibn Ali narrated to us. He said that Sa'id narrated to us. He said that Attab ibn Bishr narrated to us. He said that Khusayf informed us on the authority of Ikrimah, on the authority of Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, regarding touching the penis. Ibn Abbas, he said, in araktahu, arak al-adim. If you scraped it, if you like scrubbed it, the way that you might scrub a leather skin, right? If you scratched it the way you might try to scratch a leather skin that you're cleaning or getting ready to tan, in araktahu arak al-adim fatawadda. If you touched it to such the extent like you're scraping it delk, right? You're rubbing it, you're scrubbing it the way you might scrub a leather skin, then make wudu. And if not, then no. And so here you see that the statement of Ibn Abbas, although he's saying that you should make wudu, he's only saying you should make wudu if you do it to a certain extent. And you can already imagine how this is going to lead to an argumentation of, well, does it break the wudu or not? Because if it breaks the wudu, then the smallest amount nullifies the wudu, and it doesn't have to be to this extent. But this was the statement of Ibn Abbas. And one thing we'll mention here, even though it might be out of place to mention it here, but you know, is that we have to remember that, in my opinion, I often say that a lot of the Salaf, they would make certain things obligatory, or they would mention the necessity of doing certain things because of the natural disposition to do something. And if you're going to do something, you might as well do an act of worship. So if any one of you were to rub or scratch or touch his penis directly, for example, then how many other people would feel comfortable touching that person's hand or taking something from that person's hand or having that person's hand reach and eat from the same tray as them, even if they use their left hand, right? The cross-contamination, if you will be something that most of us would find repulsive, and we would tell the person, go wash your hand. And so if we would tell them to go wash their hand, is it better to just wash your hands or to make a wudu? And so for this reason, you might find some people saying make a wudu from this aspect. And Allah knows best. This is like the statement of Ibn Abbas. In araktahu arak al-adim, right? If you just touched it, right, your hand rubbed by, no big deal. But if you were touching it and interacting with it to such an extent that you were like scrubbing a leather skin, then yeah, go make wudu, go clean yourself, right? That's nasty. Go wash your hands. And so Allah knows best, this might be the view of someone like Ibn Abbas. After mentioning the verification of his claims, that which proves what he attributed to the Sahaba, he then mentions those who adopted this view from the Tabi'een, the Tabi'een, and the Imams. And so he says, وَبِهِ قَالَ عَطَاء وَسَعِيدَ بن المسيب وأبان بن عثمان وعروة بن الزبير وسليمان بن يسار والزهري وروي ذلك عن أبي العالية ومجاهد. So from the Tabi'een, he says, and this was the view that was said by Ata, yani Ata bin Abi Rabah, as well as Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab, as well as Aban ibn Uthman, the son of Uthman ibn Affan, as well as Urwa ibn Zubayr. And Aban ibn Uthman was one of the scholars of Medina, right? Close in proximity to the Fuqaha as-Sab'a. Likewise, Urwa ibn Zubayr and Sulaiman ibn Yasar, all of which were from the Fuqaha as-Sab'a, along with Sa'id. Likewise, az-Zuhri, right, from the Sighar al-Tabi'een. And this was also reported on Abil Aliyah and Mujahid, right, from Kufa and from Mecca. So these were from the Tabi'een who adopted this view. Likewise, he says, وَقَالَ جابر بن زيد إِذَا مَسَّهُ مُتَعَمِّدًا أَعَادَ وكان الأوزاعي والشافعي وأحمد وإسحاق وأبو ثور يوجبون الوضوء من مس الذكر. He says that Jabir ibn Zayd, if I'm not mistaken, from the Tabi'een, he said that if he touches it on purpose, he needs to repeat his wudu. And so he made the decisive factor being whether the person had intent when touching their penis or not. And so if a person touches it on purpose, according to Jabir ibn Zayd, he should repeat his wudu. So this is like a caveat to that first opinion. You have the first opinion, yes, and then a caveat like Ibn Abbas, if he touches it to such an extent, and then another caveat like Jabir ibn Zayd, if he touches it on purpose. And then Ibn al-Mundhir, he says, وَكَانَ الْأَوْزَاعِي, right? The Imam al-Awza'i, as well as al-Shafi'i, as well as Ahmed, as well as Ishaq, as well as Abu Thawr, all of them used to make it obligatory, used to make wudu obligatory from touching the penis. So these are the scholars who held this view. He says, وَاخْتُلِفَ الرِّوَايَةُ عَنْ مَالِكٍ فحكى ابن القاسم عنه أنه لا ينتقض الوضوء من مس شرج ولا رفغ إلا من مس الذكر وحده. وقال أبو بكر وهذا القول المشهور عند أصحابه عنه. وحكى يونس عن أشهب عن مالك أنه سئل عمن صلى وقد مس ذكر قال لا إعادة عليه. قال أبو بكر نعم طيب. He says, and there is disagreement regarding the statements reported from Malik. So we mentioned Shafi'i, Ahmed, right? We haven't mentioned Abu Hanifa yet. We mentioned Awza'i and Ishaq and Abu Thawr, all of them who had madhahib. He says, but there's a difference of opinion regarding the reports from Malik. So Ibn al-Qasim, one of the students of Imam Malik, he reports on Imam Malik that he said, wudu is not nullified from touching the sarj, nor the rafq. The rafq is the concealed spots of the body, like the armpits, where the two joints come together, right? The armpits, the insides of the thighs, the insides of the knees, right? These are where that they call the rafq. Naam. And these are the maghabin, like the hidden spots on the body. For example, if you're a person of weight, maybe under the belly, right? Where no sunlight gets to, the sweat develops there, and you have, those parts of the body where the filth builds up, right? That is what is known as a rafq. As far as a sarj, if I'm not mistaken, then the sharj, not a sarj, a sharj is the anus, but let's double check. Sharj. شرج ابن العرابي شرج إذا سمن وسمنا حسنا وشرج إذا فهم والسرج عرى المصحف وعيبة والخبا ونحو ذلك وسرجا وأشرجها وشرجها أدخل بعض عراها في بعض. So a sarj would be the similar to the rafq, right? Those hidden spaces. وسرج اللحم خالته الشحم. Those fatty spots. So that would be specifically places like the underbelly and things like that, under the cheeks, inside the thighs, right? That would be the sarj. And so he says, Yani Ibn al-Mundhir, that there is different reports from Malik. So Ibn al-Qasim reports on Malik that he said wudu is not nullified by touching the sharj, right? The fatty concealed spots, the inner naked fatty spots, nor touching the rafq, right? And the rafq, like we said, is where the joints come together, those concealed spots where the joints come together. He said there is only wudu from touching the penis alone. So this is one view of Malik, that touching the penis is the only thing that nullifies wudu. And this would be similar to what is being mentioned by this first group of scholars. So he would be in unison with Shafi'i and Imam Ahmed from the four Imams. And then Abu Bakr, he says, وَهَذَا الْقَوْلِ, and this statement is the more popular one with the companions of Malik from him, right? The majority of the Malikiyah, they would adopt this view. And this is because Ibn al-Qasim is the individual who compiled the Mudawwana, right? He's one of the more famous students of Imam Malik. Abu Bakr, he says, but on the other hand, Yunus has reported on Ashhab that Malik was asked about an individual who offers salat and they had previously touched their penis. He says there's no need for them to repeat. La i'adata alayh. There is no need for them to repeat. And so this would show that Imam Malik doesn't deem it necessary to make wudu from touching the private part, because he didn't invalidate this person's salat, nor did he command them to repeat it or their wudu. And so these are the two views of Imam Malik. And we're still on this first opinion that touching the private part does necessitate a wudu. Abu Bakr, rahimahullah ta'ala, ibn al-Mundhir, he says, وَاحْتَجَّ الشَّافِعِي وَغَيْرُهُ مِنْ أَصْحَابِنَا فِي إِيجَابِهِمَ الْوُضُوءِ مِنْ مَسِّ الذَّكْرِ بِحَدِيثِ بُصْرَةُ بِنْتِ صَفْوَانِ. After mentioning the people who have adopted this opinion from the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, the Tabi'een, and the A'imma, what is their evidence? And you often see that they mention like what Shafi'i mentioned as the evidence, because Shafi'i was one of those scholars who, from the people of Hadith, who combined between Hadith and Fiqh, right? And from the earliest of them to do it. And so he says, in a Shafi'i and other than him from our companions. Because remember, Ibn al-Mundhir, although he was a mujtahid, he was Shafi'iyul madhab in his origin and what he learned and sprouted from. So he says, in Shafi'i and other than him from our companions, use as a proof for their obligating a wudu from touching the private part, the hadith of Busra, the daughter of Safwan, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. What is this hadith? He says, أخبرنا الربيع قال حدثنا الشافعي قال حدثنا مالك عن عبد الله بن أبي بكر بن عمرو بن حزم أنه سمع عروة بن الزبير يقول دخلت على مروان فتذاكرنا ما يكون منه الوضوء فقال مروان من مس الذكر الوضوء فقال عروة ما علمت ذلك فقال مروان أخبرتني بصرة بنت صفوان أنها سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إذا مس أحدكم ذكره فليتوضأ. This narration is one that is extreme in its benefit. He says that, yani Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir, he says that al-Rabi' informed us. He said that al-Shafi'i narrated to us. He said that Malik narrated to us on the authority of Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr ibn Amr ibn Hazm, right, a major scholar, who said, I heard Urwa ibn Zubair, right, another major scholar from the Tabi'een. He said, I entered upon Marwan ibn al-Hakam, who would later become the Khalifa, right? Before he was the Khalifa, he served a period of time as the governor of Medina. And so Urwa, he's saying, I entered upon Marwan fatadhakarna. So we reviewed together, right? We would recall amongst each other the evidences or the things that necessitate a wudu. We were studying together the things that necessitate a wudu. So this is Urwa ibn Zubair, the son of the Sahabi, the brother of a future Khalifa, the faqih from the Fuqaha as-Sab'a, reviewing with the governor of Medina, who would later become the Khalifa, right? So this shows you that these people were upon knowledge. And, you know, there was a sharing of knowledge and a valuing of knowledge in its people from the commoner to the ruler. So we reviewed those things that cause wudu. And so Marwan, he said, wudu is caused from touching the penis. And Urwa, he said to that, I did not know that. Ma'alim tu dhalik. I didn't know that. Right? So Marwan provided Urwa with information that he didn't have. To which Marwan, he said, I was informed by it, or Busra, the daughter of Safwan, informed me of that. She said that she heard the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, saying, if one of you touches his penis, then he must make wudu. إِذَا مَسَّ أَحَدَكُمْ ذَكَرَ فَلْيَتَوَضَّأ. If one of you touches his penis, then he must make wudu. And this isnad, right, the whole reliability or lack thereof regarding this isnad will be centered around Marwan. Marwan ibn al-Hakim, if you consider him to be somebody reliable in hadith, then this hadith is reliable. And if you consider him to be other than that, right, then this hadith would be other than that. Because everybody else in this chain is reliable. And so this would serve as a strong proof for those who say that it is necessary to make wudu for touching your private part. Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir, he says, وَقَدْ اخْتُلِفَ فِي إِسْنَادِ حَدِيثِ عُرْوَةٍ فقال ابن جريج عن الزهري عن عبد الله بن أبي بكر عن عروة عن بصرة أو عن زيد بن خالد. وقال معمر عن الزهري عن عروة عن مروان عن بصرة. وقال عمرو بن سريج عن الزهري عن عروة عن عائشة. وقال هشام بن زياد عن هشام بن عروة عن أبيه عن أروى بنت أنيس عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. وقال آخر عن الزهري عن عروة عن عبد الرحمن بن عبد القاري عن عبد الرحمن بن عبد القاري عن أبي أيوب. وقد تكلم في هذا الإسناد والله أعلم. طيب, now we have an issue, right? That was the narration that Shafi'i used. But Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir, he says, and there is disagreement regarding the chain of the hadith of Urwa. This hadith that we just mentioned, Malik on Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr ibn Amr ibn Hazm, right? That's the first person that this da'irah, that this hadith is centered around. Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr ibn Amr ibn Hazm, who says that he heard Urwa on Marwan, and Busra, right? So it's a short chain, 4 people. Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr ibn Amr ibn Hazm, Urwa, Marwan, Busra. Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir, he says, and there's disagreement regarding the isnad of the hadith of Urwa. So Ibn Jurayj, right? Malik, we already mentioned his chain. Abdullah on Urwa, on Marwan, on Busra. But Ibn Jurayj was another scholar, contemporary of Imam Malik. He said that this hadith that he got was on Az-Zuhri, right? So he got it from Az-Zuhri on Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr. The same Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr, ibn Amr ibn Hazm, on Urwa. So we're the same up until now, on Busra. And so he drops out of the Isnad Marwan. And so is this Urwa getting it directly from Busra, or is it Urwa narrating it with irsal on Busra, or tadlis on Busra? Is it Urwa being mistaken? Because he says, or Zayd ibn Khalid, radiyallahu ta'ala. So this version of Ibn Jurayj on Zuhri, on Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr, on Urwa, is either on Busra or on Zayd ibn Khalid. And so now we see some instability, right? Is Marwan in the isnad or not? Did Urwa get it directly or not? Did he preserve who he got it from or not? Likewise, he says, Yani Ibn Mundhir, he says, وَقَالَ Ma'mar. Ma'mar is another contemporary of people like Malik and Ibn Jurayj, a scholar from Yemen. He said, Ma'mar said his version was on Az-Zuhri, on Urwa directly, on Marwan, on Busra. So he didn't mention Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr. He just goes Zuhri straight to Urwa, right? On Marwan, on Busra. And then he says, قال وقال عمر بن سريج. Umar ibn Surayj is another scholar or another person who narrated hadith. وهو عمر ibn Sa'id ibn Surayj. He says that his version is on Az-Zuhri, directly on Urwa, on Aisha. So not Busra and no Marwan, but directly to Aisha. And then Abu ibn al-Mundhir, he says, in Hisham ibn Ziyad, and Hisham ibn Ziyad is another narrator, he says that his version is on Hisham ibn Urwa, on his father, on Urwa bint Unais, on the authority of the Prophet ﷺ. So he has a completely different chain on his father. And then he says, and another person mentions it, another chain, another version of this narration, on Az-Zuhri, on Urwa, on Abdul Rahman ibn Abd al-Qari, on Abi Ayyub, yani Abi Ayyub al-Ansari. So you have all of these different versions of the hadith coming from Urwa. And one might want to say, well, this is just Urwa narrating in a bunch of different ways, but this is also something that could be considered instability, iltirab, right? Is it that Urwa narrates it all of these different ways? Or is it that we're unsure that all of these people preserved it correctly from Urwa, and therefore the hadith is unstable? We don't know which one is the right version. And for that reason, Abu Bakr ibn al-Mundhir, he says, and indeed there has been some discussion about this isnad, and Allah knows best, right? There's some people who have talked against this isnad, and Allah knows best. So even when we look at all of these versions, we can't count them as all supporting each other per se, right? Somebody who wants to deem this hadith inauthentic, they would say that these different narrations don't support each other. Instead, they tear each other apart because of the instability in it. For huwa muttarad, it's a hadith that is unstable, and for that reason, people have criticized this hadith and ruled it to be inauthentic, and Allah knows best, right? So you have some scholars who would say it's authentic, while you have other scholars who would say it's unstable and inauthentic. And so like this, you see that there's disagreement regarding the first opinion, right, where the disagreement comes in. Although we mentioned from the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, the Tabi'in and the Imams, those who adopted that view. And it is the more popular view of 3 of the 4 Imams, right? And so that's the first view, that touching the private part necessitates, or touching the penis specifically, necessitates a purification, a wudu. And we mentioned 2 caveats. The caveat of Abdullah bin Abbas, if you rub it the way that you might rub a leather skin, with intensity. And then we mentioned the caveat of Jabir ibn Zayd, if you touch it on purpose. And so like this, we finished the first view regarding does touching the penis nullify the wudu, and the answer to the first group of scholars is yes. Inshallah, next time we'll talk about the second opinion, where the author, he says, وَقَالَتْ طَائِفَةٌ لَيْسَ فِي مَسِّ الذَّكَرِ وُضُوء. And another group of scholars says there is no purification necessary, or there's no wudu necessary for touching the penis. We'll stop at this amount. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Naam, alhamdulillah. How do Muslim men use that water pot in the bathroom? Is it poured on the privates or on the toilet paper, then wipe? So you're talking about when you go to a bathroom in certain masajid, for example, or somebody's home, and they have a flower pot that they use for istinja. Istinja is the cleaning of one's private parts after, urination or defecation. And when it comes to urination or defecation, then there are a couple of different methods in cleaning oneself. One of them is wiping, right, where an individual would use tissue nowadays, or historically stone or something like that, a rag, something that they could wipe the area with. And the other way is to use water directly, right, whether it be a bidet or something else. And so when it comes to using water directly, the hard part of using water directly is angling the water to the locations that it needs to get to. And so as it relates to the penis, for example, that's easy. But as it relates to the anus or maybe the vagina, it might be hard to get the water to those locations. And so from that which the Muslims use as a convenience, if they don't have a bidet, if they don't have a spray bottle or something like that, they just use a flower pot, because it's easier to pour the water in abundance into those areas. So if you use a flower pot and pour it behind yourself, that water rushes and falls into the location necessary to remove and extract the filth that might be between the anus cheeks. And so that's the reason they use the flower pot. You can put it on the toilet paper and use it to wet the tissue if you want. Something that, is a game changer in a lot of people's opinions as it relates to hygiene and comfort and being clean are the wet wipes, the disposable flushable wet naps. This is something that it cleans the location and alleviates the dry scrubbing that can cause irritation, having that moisture in there. And so wet naps are a good way to go. And so toilet tissue, a lot of times if you apply water to it, it'll just dissolve and or you'll have to use too much of it to maintain any consistency, which can clog your pipes. And all of these things are things that Muslims should think about and be competent of. When we talk about plumbing and sewer systems and all of these things, right? There has to be an Islamic view regarding the correct application of these things, right? Don't just think that indoor plumbing, because it's a convenience, the way that we use it is automatically the best way it's done, right? Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he talks about it in Iqtida Sirat al-Mustaqim, that nothing that the kuffar do, even in the things that improve their dunya, are completely perfect. And if they had been completely perfect, they would have deserved a reward for it. So even though indoor plumbing is something we benefit from, as Muslims, we have to look and see, is it Sharia compliant, for example? And if not, then how can we make it so? So, for example, in America, you don't find a toilet except that you have to defecate or urinate into standing water. This is against the Sharia. So what can we do to change it, right? How the toilet is a seat where we relax and rest on, right? Is that the best way, or is there another way? And what can we do to change it if needed? Likewise, when we talk about plumbing and how the water, this water is just a najis water flowing around through the city. And, how does it work? And where does it get recycled? Where does it let out at? And is that the best possible method, right? All of these things are things. And so Islam is not just a religion of, halal, haram in the religious sense to where it's theoretical. We use this information to improve our communities. What can a Muslim plumber provide the society that only a Muslim plumber who understood Islam and understood plumbing would be able to provide society, right? Is the toilet facing the Qibla, right? When we build the houses, are we making sure we're building the toilets away from the Qibla? All of these have to do with the science of plumbing, the field of being a plumber. So don't think just because you're a plumber, for example, you don't have a responsibility to understand the religion, and you don't have an avenue through which you can help and further the religion by implementing these religious rules. So we need plumbers, we need electricians, we need doctors, we need people who are familiar with secular law, we need bakers, and all of these things, construction workers, carpenters, all of these things, we need their skill, and we need their skill to be in unison with the Sharia so they can make the advancements and the improvements that the Muslims need in their community to enjoy the best type of lifestyle as possible. So don't think that Islam is just a religion of in the masjid all day reading the book. No, we need people to go to school for these other fields, but that comes with the necessity of accompanying that knowledge and those skills with the religion, not independent of it. But as it relates to the flower pot, I think we talked about it sufficiently enough. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.